Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to episode 23 of Might Help, Can't Hurt. And I am here with a new friend, leader, and doer, Miss Ginny Clarke. And Ginny works at Google at the moment, but she also is known part of what she does at Google with diversity hiring and has written a book called Career Mapping. All of which we are going to talk about during our time together. So Ginny, welcome.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's great to be on your show.
I appreciate it. So people listening know it's, I did kind of just do you okay to go anywhere? And she was like, sure. So we'll put together where we're going to go. But I think the thing that struck me this morning when I was preparing for this was you talk about career mapping, but is the whole idea of a career still relevant? Like how is that changing where the future is? I don't know if it's really more uncertain than it's ever been, but it sure as heck looks more uncertain than it's ever been.
Yeah, it is. It is. And so the map is really intended to empower the individual to understand. I start with my first chapter talking about free agency. And the whole idea is to reframe people's orientation, which is, please take me for this job versus I'm going to select what I want based on what suits me.
Right.
Well, I need to do some introspection to understand myself first. And I got a 24-year-old son who's going through that now. He's a couple years out of school, and fortunately he's working and he's in the entertainment space. But I think he's a little bit, maybe through osmosis, because I don't know that he ever actually read my book. He's understanding.
I'd say that's appalling, but I know none of my kids have read mine. So
let's just get real, right? I mean, do they read anything other than text anyway? It's like the way they write would suggest not, but that's a whole nother conversation. But the real thrust of the book is for people to feel empowered and to own whatever it is that they end up doing. We call it a career historically. You can call it work, you can call it whatever you want. Right. But the whole thing is that it's not linear. For me, it wasn't. For a lot of people, it was. Going forward, it's definitely not going to be. So you better be armed with the component parts of what's going to allow you to make those moves that serve you well, depending on what your own objectives are. It's not like, when our parents were coming through, they had certain options. You did, and as Black people, we had in professional ranks that were very limited. You worked for the post office, you were a nurse, you were one of 5 things in my parents' generation. So now all bets are off. People are making millions on internet sensation, but be deliberate is the whole point of this approach in career mapping.
So in terms of being deliberate, so if I'm in a place where either like our kids, sort of starting out in a career, because I've got 2 kids who are at that stage, or I've been doing something for a long time, but now I've been furloughed or I've been let go, or I can see the writing on the wall. This sounds like a crazy question, even as I hear it in my head, but how do I know what I want? If I don't know what's on offer? Normally you go to a restaurant and you look at what's on the menu, but if there's no menu, where do we even begin?
That's a very existential question, actually.
I know.
and that's the underpinning to my book. It's actually quite spiritual, which is a place that I come from. And it's really sort of saying, what do you want? And no one can answer that for you, but you. Mm-hmm. And I want people to start in a vacuum. I want them to start there, not caring what the jobs are. I had so many people, as I was a partner at Spencer Stewart and an executive search firm, for those who aren't familiar with them. And I had so many people come to me and say, okay, what should I do? Here's my resume. What do you think? And I kind of take it and out of respect, but I'd ask, what do you want me to think? It's not, it's not as though what you've done sets you up for a job. You need to determine what you're going to do with what you've done based on what it is that you want. Right. And I also believe in the law of attraction that says, what I want, I can create. And that's the power of all of this. And that's what I was trying to get people to understand. It's not, am I qualified for this job? That could be important too, but do you even want the job? Can we start there? Do you want to work for this company? Did you choose that organization? Did you choose the function? Did you choose the role? Choose those things first, and then let's talk, and then start a job search.
No, I can totally see that if I've been around the block a few times.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about like one of my daughters, two of my daughters are sort of, at that point where they're just literally, they've never done anything particular other than gone to school and bits and pieces. So I don't think they could answer the question of, do I want to work here?
Well, then dabble.
Right.
And literally people are so afraid to do that. And I'm telling that to my son, he's kind of going, well, I think I want to do this thing for a couple of years. I'm like, great, do it for a couple of years.
Yeah.
With a vision toward directionally. I'm not trying to tell you that this needs to be where you stay for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
In fact, I hope it's not. If it's the same industry that you've always had a passion for that I've observed, and it continues to feed your soul, then yes, stay in it. But if at any point it's not feeding you, then pivot. But the only way that you're going to learn is to jump in and try something. I don't care if you started working at Starbucks. Begin to discern the extent to which you enjoy retail and customer service and showing up and being in front of the public versus doing something that's more behind the scenes. I mean, look at the different pieces of the situations that you might, first of all, starting again with yourself. Yeah. Who are you? What do you like? Are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Take a Strengthsfinders, take an Enneagram. Look for some clues. If, what did your teachers used to say about you? Look at your report cards. What were you always good in and what did you love? And let those things begin to filter into the work that you do. And I think a lot of folks don't even feel entitled to do that, right? Which is unfortunate.
And it's interesting because actually, as you're talking, I'm realizing that that's actually very similar to the advice I generally give people is flirt before you date before you get engaged, be engaged before you get married.
There you go. I love that.
Yeah. Sure. So in terms of the Strengthsfinders and things like that, like I remember doing one of those tests in school and it told me I was supposed to be a forest ranger. So how tight do we have to follow these?
Well, Strengthsfinders fortunately doesn't. I don't think it prescribes actual vocations or avocations or roles, but look at again directionally. Okay, don't take anything literally. I know people are sometimes looking like, tell me what to do. Just tell me. Yeah. I'm not going to do that. This is your journey. It's a hero's journey. It's get out there. Take your lumps, but take some risks. And the risks are relatively low the younger you are.
So now what's the transition been like from helping individuals find work to helping a company find individuals?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's how I started being as an executive recruiter in a search firm. My clients were companies like Google. So that's where I came at it from. But I was actually a college recruiter when I graduated from UC Davis. So I've always had this thread, even though I went to business school, worked in financial services, not as a recruiter for a number of years. And I came back and realized that I really love assessing people.
Yeah.
Over time, and especially at Google, I've learned how much I appreciate and understand the system, the talent system, and leadership in particular. And so it's been really gratifying to integrate all these different pieces. And the career piece keeps coming up as well, because all these things are interconnected. So I also am responsible for internal mobility for Google's leaders, meaning I'm going to help some of the ones that might be looking for another job within Google to find a new opportunity. And I use the whole thesis of my book, which is before we start just trying to match you up with different hiring managers, let's do a bit of a deep dive. You've been here for a while, maybe, or maybe not that long. What do you love to do? I mean, that's where we start. We start asking those questions. And then
but I love the simplicity of that.
Well, because it is simple. Question. Well, and a lot of these people they haven't paused. They've been heads down, nose to the grindstone, just, pushing it out every day. And so for them, they're kind of taken aback, like, whoa, that's not what I expected you to be asking me. And I don't know that I'm prepared to answer. But we really are intentional and pull it out of them, because the next step is to begin to articulate their competencies. And that is the other through line for everything that I've done, whether it's talking about the individual in career mapping, talking about assessing talent to come in to work for Google or any company that I might have represented. It's what are those deconstructed elements of the things that you've done? It's the how. It's not just, and it's experience is probably the worst predictor for future success, right? People are so comfortable. Have you done it before? Well, you could have done it really poorly, but you can say that you've done it. Competencies get to the how. And so that's what we really coach people to do in this internal mobility program. And that's the coaching that I've given to other individuals of all ages. Describe for me how you do things. And now let's begin to reconstruct those elements, those competencies, into something that is of your choosing that's going to give you a sense of joy.
Right. And do you get pushback in the sense of people going, well, look, I know what I'd love to do, but that's never going to happen? Like, I mean, is that?
Yeah. I get pushback, and my response is, well, then what do you believe?
Yeah.
What do you believe? This is what it comes down to. And this is why this can't be just an exercise that it's independent of you and who you are. So if you believe that, and I said this to a large group of people, I was doing a career mapping thing for Google, within Google, and there were 1,500 people. I think 3,000 signed up and 1,500 actually signed in. So it's telling you there's a large demand internally for people wanting to know, what am I supposed to do next, right? And part of what I talked about is what are your beliefs and what are your fears? Because if you're focused on being afraid of what's about to happen in the environment, in our economy, and it's scary, it's daunting. We've never seen anything like this. I get that. But you also have to have some, and I'm faith-based. Excuse me, I'm not religious, but I have a deep faith in something bigger than me. Yeah. And I do believe that what I put out, I can manifest. What I can envision, I can create. Right. And so that's really kind of where I'm coming from in all of this. It's like if you're just operating from fear and you're just afraid and you never could see yourself doing it, then stop asking for it, because it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I remember a friend of the family asked me to sit down with her daughter, who was kind of having a bit of a nervous breakdown at school. And so I took her to lunch. I mean, it was just a chat. But at one point I asked her, she was saying, yeah, and my mom wants me to do this and I want to do that. And she didn't say I want to do that. She said, my mom wants me to do this. My dad wants me to do that. And I said to her, well, what do you want? And she looked stunned.
Right.
And I didn't quite get what was going on. And she kind of was choking back emotion. And she said, nobody has ever asked me that.
That's heartbreaking.
I know it was. It really was. She was 19.
Yeah.
And no one had ever asked her, and it hadn't occurred to her to ask. Now, the good news was she started looking. She did drop out for a while. I actually gave her a job because she was brilliant for a short time, and then she went back to school. She just got her PhD, and but at the time, the downside was her mother wanted to kill me because she thought I was going to talk her into staying in school. But whatever. I mean, yeah. I didn't. It was just kind of cool to see that even at that age, once she looked, she could see.
That's right.
But it was so hard to get her to look.
Yeah. But you see the power of beliefs, and sometimes our beliefs are shaped often by those around us and people who love us and have good intentions and want the best for us.
Yeah.
And I had to do that with my son. He was struggling at a different point for more social reasons when he was in school. And I said, take a break, get it together. This should be something that's formative and supportive and positive. And I think our, parents of our generation and younger generations even really need to just be at peace with allowing their children to walk a different path. The old paradigm doesn't work anymore, and it's definitely not going to work as we move through COVID. We're looking at a completely different kind of a job environment, work environment.
Now, do you have a sense of what that might look like? I'm sure you've thought about it. I'm sure everyone's thinking about it.
Well, I've thought about it, but I feel like there's more coming that the likes of which we've not seen. I'm hopeful. I really am ready for a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
We know working for Google, it was announced last week, we're not going back into the office before June of 2021.
Yeah.
That in and of itself, I, for one, am thinking about moving back to Chicago. I'll just put that out there. It's a city where that's where I lived for many, many years, and I prefer it to the Bay Area.
Yeah.
So I think that you're going to see just geo movement.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see a different kind of work and different kinds of leadership capabilities that are going to be called for, so that work has to go on with people that are remote, fewer people in some cases. So we don't know what all that's going to mean, but it's, I hope that people will not run away from it, and instead will lean into it and look for new ways to make money, to contribute, to serve, ways that we haven't seen yet.
So let me go sideways. How do you like the word diversity?
Not really.
What word would you use? What language?
I like it. I think the context matters. I'm tired of it in a corporate context. Let me just say that, because I've been in corporate America for 30 plus years, and I've been a recruiter for 20 something. And I moved into a diversity and co-founded a diversity practice that was in vogue in the late 90s.
Right.
And I think it can really marginalize a lot of one's knowledge. So in my own situation, I'll speak from that first. People see me as a diversity recruiter. Well, the fact of the matter is I learned the ins and outs, every nuance of executive recruiting. Full stop. Not diversity executive recruiting. Because unless you can do recruiting, executive level recruiting, you can't layer on the diversity element, right? And diversity doesn't just mean that I know a lot of Black people and Latinos, which is frankly what I think some people believed was the case. And instead, it's an add-on to a system. So in this context, especially in post, I shouldn't say post, we're in Black Lives Matter. It's a movement, and I hope that it continues. I've frankly been a bit amused by some of my colleagues who are, running around going, "We need to hire Black people."
Quick!
Come on, you've heard it. You know it's happening. If you haven't heard it yourself, you've heard it indirectly. And I've gotten plenty of phone calls from people saying, "Oh, we're really interested in you." I'm thinking, wow, just recently that happened. I guess it's on one level, Michael, it's offensive. It's personally, I'm a tough old broad, so I don't get my feelings hurt. But at the same time, it's kind of like, wait, I wasn't good enough a year ago or 6 months ago. Yeah. And now all of a sudden you're willing to let me in. No, that's not what I'm talking about. My flavor of what's known as diversity, to me, comes down to two things. It's talent and leadership. All the race, the gender, all that other stuff, that matters. But if you really know how to assess talent, and you can assess on the basis of competencies, you're going to get the diversity, right? If you're not hiring your friends, if you're not hiring people that worked at the same companies, went to the same schools, have the same experience as you, and you're really digging in to understand and contextualize the capabilities and competencies that you're looking for your business today. And as I just described, business is changing. So you're going to need different people who are bringing something different into this new world that we live in. But if you're still trying to plow forward out of a sense of loyalty to those same people, I think organizations are going to have to wake up and recognize that talent looks like me. It looks like you. It looks like a whole lot of other things that you heretofore haven't seen. And I think a lot of these companies are going to, even when, and I think for Black folks, the door is open. It's not going to be open indefinitely, I don't think, because at the same time, we've got this dynamic of an economy that is depressed, seriously depressed. And so, hiring is not going to keep going up, let's face it. But I think these organizations need to be really careful about what are you asking people who heretofore have not been included. What are you expecting? Are you expecting assimilation? Right? Come on in and behave like us and everything will be great. Yeah. Or you're expecting people to be who they are, which you might not be used to or even comfortable with.
Because you've worked, and we're going to stay off Google because that's your job and I don't need to go there, but just generally in the industry, I mean, corporations do have cultures. And,
absolutely.
And it's not just a black-white thing. It's a corporate, it's a Google. I remember, sorry, I'm bringing Google up now, but I remember having a client years ago who was deciding between Google and Yahoo, and they had two such distinctly different cultures. And he, funnily enough, was a white guy, but didn't want to try and assimilate into the Yahoo culture because it just didn't suit him.
Yeah.
But it did occur to me, had they hired him, they would have wanted him to assimilate into it because that's their corporate culture. So
it's an unconscious thing. The other thing that I'm really increasingly intentional about is, or at least want to caution people. Yeah. We talk about culture as this ubiquitous thing.
Yeah.
It's impersonal. And culture to me is nothing more than an amalgam of behaviors of the leaders at the time. Right? So there needs to be ownership there. I think that's really important, especially as we're trying to move toward a new paradigm. What's going to drive it? It's people. It's the way they lead. It's who they are. It's the beliefs and the values that they're bringing into that workplace every single day. Workplace being here, this virtual workplace that we're all living through.
We're both hard at work.
Yeah, we are. We're working right now. So I think we have to not just let culture off the hook and say, oh, well, that's our culture.
Right.
Yeah, well, are you sure that that's really what you want it to be?
Right. So one of the arguments I've heard against, and I'm going to call it, nobody else called it this, though maybe it is a thing, the voice hiring. So the voice where the judges have their backs turned and they don't know what the person looks like.
The blind auditions.
Yeah. So that blind hiring, that creates an unfair advantage because of the culture that has led to higher cultivation of talent in the white community than the Black and Latina. How real is that? Like, how real is a problem would blind hiring be in that sense, colorblind hiring, or however you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I've heard of it. It sounds great. I was on the board of Chicago Sinfonietta for many years, and it's the nation's most diverse orchestra. And so I think some of that started in blind auditions among musicians. And that was one way to increase the diversity. And there's a literal term, right? Diverse, making something more diverse. So diversity, I don't not like the word. I don't always like the way it's used. Back to that question. But in hiring in a corporate environment, that's not necessarily plausible. You've got things like the way people speak, right? Their accents, their intonations, there are all kinds of things, right, that are gonna play in. And at some point, you're gonna meet me, and you're gonna know what I look like and my ancestry, possibly, right? So I think I get it that it's a well-intentioned effort, and on a mass hiring scale, maybe it's helpful. But I'm going back to what I think really matters, which is we need people to become objective. We need them to be able to assess on the basis of competencies and it's hard because I don't ever want this to become an algorithm, right? That's when we've lost our humanity.
Right.
So as long as it's people, you're going to have bias. People are going to have preferences. I have them, you have them.
Yeah.
So how do we eliminate that? I don't know that we ever do. But I think we can work hard to build in rubrics and protocols and frameworks around competencies that allow people to really look at, well, how did Michael do that? It's nice that he worked there and has done this job before, but let's get him to describe how it is that he did some of those things to achieve the outcomes that were both negative and positive. Let's see how self-aware he is.
Right.
Those are the things that really begin to matter. Don't just, that some of the interview questions are just horrendous that people ask. So ask the things that really matter and dig in, and don't try to walk in and not assume that because a person doesn't look like you, that they can't be as good. And frankly, that's what this whole Black Lives Matter is about, right? It's recognizing that Black people have indeed been viewed as inferior in this country. And so we need to, I know there are a lot of folks that are well-meaning and know in their heart of hearts that they are not racist, they are not discriminatory in any way, and I get that. But I think when we start to connect the dots and bring some of this hopefulness and apply it in the day-to-day of, okay, who am I going to hire, right? And is it going to be this person or that person, and on what basis? And am I now comfortable having a Black person or someone who's not like me that I'm as my manager or telling me what to do? You know, how is that going to really start to feel when people start feeling threatened, if by chance they feel it's a zero-sum game and it's the survival of the fittest? Remember, we're back in this very difficult time that we're in. Yeah. So I mean, there are a lot of considerations to selection of people in jobs, and I think we have to just be really mindful of how it is that we're assessing and what the job is that we need done, and that whole thing around culture and not assimilating. Don't expect me to behave like you.
So how do I become conscious of my unconscious bias?
Man, I'm not sure I can tell you that one.
No, but if you could, we could write a book. It would be really good.
Okay, that's something for us to do together. Like, let's pick it apart, because I think it first starts with getting called out.
Yeah.
Right. And you can either, once you're called out, you can either run from it and deny it,
right,
or you can lean into it and say, yeah, I'm guilty. This is me.
Yeah.
And it's not a black-white thing. This isn't about shame. This is about understanding.
Yeah.
This is about making change. If we really mean it, then we should lean in. And this is making everybody better. I mean, I was reading something by Stephen Biko, who was a South African activist who was assassinated in the 70s. And he talks about white mediocrity. And part of what he's suggesting is that white folks haven't had Black people around them for so long. Many of us have come along and become well-educated, but not always let in, right? And so there's a real comfort level the white folks have. There's a whole group of people that haven't had to challenge them and arguably, potentially up their game. So it's, the dynamics are quite complex, and it's going to take a while for us to find steady state. But I'm optimistic.
You said something I think is probably more of a key to it than maybe even you meant, maybe not, which is that it's not about shame.
No.
Because so much of it feels like it's about shame.
Of course it does. I get that.
And yet when it isn't, it's the same as what you were saying earlier about fear. When it's about fear, you're kind of screwed before you start. When it's about dealing with shame, you're kind of screwed before you start.
Yeah.
There's
some of the shame.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I think some of the shame that's felt is in part because someone like me, who I'm talking to you honestly, I speak very emphatically, and there are aspects of what I say where I am coming from a place of personal anger and resentment. And I've done a lot of work to undo that. But on certain things, they're triggers for me, because I've been out here a long time dealing with, discriminatory behaviors. I've had a virtual knee on my neck in certain situations, right? So the shame is me calling out, and what has been. It might not have been you personally, but you're feeling shame for your group of people that you might represent. And I get that, but I think if we can hear each other, move through these different feelings that we're having of shame, anger, resentment, all these things, fear, anxiety, then I think we can begin to, they're natural reactions. We're human. So let's go move through them and find that common ground to have a conversation and begin to move forward.
Well, and I think as you're talking, it's occurring to me, there's actually a big difference between embarrassment and shame. Like, getting called out is embarrassing. It doesn't matter what for your fly's undone. That's embarrassing. You're secretly racist. That's embarrassing. Like anything is embarrassing, but embarrassment just passes. Embarrassment doesn't have legs. It's just a momentary discomfort. When it turns into something like, oh, my white privilege, then it becomes paralyzing.
Yeah, it can.
And so there is something about being willing to be embarrassed without turning it into shame.
Yeah. Or without turning it into being all about you now, which is something that I've seen in certain cases. It's like, well, I'm feeling uncomfortable. I, Ginny, as a Black person, and making you feel uncomfortable because I am indirectly calling you out.
Yeah.
Let's have a conversation about that. But now, please don't make this all about, well, but you made me feel bad. It's like, well, gee, if we're measuring badness, I think I'm going to win with that 400 years of
There's an old Bugs Bunny cartoon where Daffy Duck gets caught outside the house during hunting season, and Bugs just says, "Yeah, I can't stand to see him suffer," and pulls down the blind.
Right. Right. Okay. So we can just end this now and not talk about it.
Yeah. So you talked at the beginning about, and you mentioned it again a bit later, about having a sort of a spiritual basis for what you do.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about that. Like what does that look like in your life, and has that support you?
Oh, wow. I'll tell you wow, I just had a flash. I think when it started, I was maybe 12 years old, and I was sitting in my bedroom in Riverside, California, staring into the mirror at my little white vanity. I had this, your daughter might have one back in the day. And I just kept looking into the mirror, and it was like an Alice in Wonderland moment. And I asked aloud of myself, who am I? Because I knew there was something more there. And many years later, after my father died, I was in my 30s, and he had been my coach, my mentor. I had two amazing parents, but when he died, I was just shaken to my core. And I luckily was introduced to someone I thought was a masseuse, who turned out to be a holistic practitioner.
Right.
And he saw things. He was intuitive, and we started a 26-year relationship where he's my guru to this day in Chicago. And Kurt Hill is his name. He's just amazing at holistic health. And it's what has it meant? It's meant that I have dug deeper into who I am so that I can be of service to others, and peeled back a lot of layers, done just a lot of work, having a lot of curiosity around consciousness and expanded consciousness. That's what it looks like for me. And when I think about the work that I do, which is all around talent, I actually kind of think that that's the next level of assessment that we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking not just at people's experience and competencies and mindset, because I think mindset begins to get the closest to consciousness.
Yeah.
I think that's where we're going to be looking. And I actually think when I say that, I'm quick to kind of orient people around the example of Steve Jobs. I think he downloaded a bunch of stuff, and that's not to minimize his accomplishments by any stretch, but I don't know that you can use cognition to get some of these paradigm changing things that happen, not just in technology, but in other sectors. And I think we look to technology, and we haven't really allowed some of the other kinds of innovations that can be downloaded if you're connected to something bigger than you, to take root in other areas and other industries and disciplines.
Well, this is very movie geek of me, but what you're saying just reminds me of the scene in The Matrix where Trinity and Neo are on the rooftop, and there's a helicopter, and Neo goes, "Do you know how to fly that?" And she goes, "Not yet." And then it downloads into her head, and she flies.
Downloads. That's what I'm talking about. I love that. That Matrix was such a spiritual story. Yeah, that's exactly what it was, where Neo was challenged, and the Oracle had to tell him that he wasn't the one, so that he would lean into himself and realize that he was. And I think that the one is all of us, right? That's the whole. I know we're getting very existential.
That's good. The great thing about this show is I don't care. I just,
I know.
Help can't hurt, right? So here's my question that I like to close the show with most times. So you're in charge of the universe. I'm just granting you
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
No. So yeah, what are you going to do with it? Like where do you begin?
If I could wave a magic wand, it would be to kind of give everybody, just wipe out the suffering and the notion. And I know many people have had to suffer to get to that defining moment of awakening.
Yeah.
But if I could accelerate that awakening, it would be for people to truly see themselves for who they are, to shed all past bad experiences, all erroneous beliefs. Just if you could just drop it. And that's almost like thinking about in the Matrix, right? In that final scene where he's fighting everybody and he just all of a sudden can like deflect bullets and be immortal. It's because he just surrendered and just let go of all of the limited thinking that he had been taught and that he had self-imposed. That's what I would love to do for people.
I think that would be a rather lovely world in which to live.
I know it would. Yeah.
Ginny Clarke, thank you so much. It has been an absolute delight. To be continued.
Thank you. I welcome it.